coming. So my name is Charles Ebikeme. I work at the International Council for Science. I'll explain a little bit about what that is a little bit later. But when they asked me to come and give a career talk, I sort of said yes without actually sort of thinking what exactly my career is exactly and my career trajectory. So they wanted me to talk about my career up until this point. So I had to sort of put it in a little bit of context and create a sort of narrative around how I think about health, global health, and my particular career path through that. So this is the title I came up with, Health and Other Spaces. And the disclaimer is it's sort of a false narrative I've sort of created to help me understand what I've done a little bit better. So I started by just a sort of basic view about health as being this sort of dichotomous relationship, cure and prevention. And my career really started sort of around here. I'm a biochemist by training. I did my undergrad a few hundred meters down the road at UCL in biochemistry. And they tend to teach you, in your undergrad, you tend to learn a lot about everything, but not a lot about anything. So my biochemistry degree was quite large and wide-ranging, but I wanted a little bit more focus to what I was studying. So I came here, a short hop down the road, and the master's degree I did, I can't actually find on the website anymore. This is the closest I can find to what I actually did. I did an MSc in molecular biology of infectious diseases. So this is the closest. I don't know if it's disappeared or if it's got merged into other things. But that's what I did. And this is the title slide for the last presentation I gave as a postdoc. So my career after my master's was mainly as a lab researcher, mainly as a bench scientist working on African sleeping sickness, a parasitic disease, and really using molecular biology and biochemistry to look for like drug targets and to sort of look into the inner workings of the parasite. So I spent a lot of my time thinking about the parasite, how it moves from man, from insect into man and then back out again, and how the parasite adapts to each individual environment that's in. So I spent a lot of my time looking at things like this, which are biochemical pathway maps, and they're very complicated, and I spent a lot of time knocking out genes, turning down genes, and looking to see if there was any effects. So after a few years of that, it got a little bit monotonous, and I started to find that what I was actually interested in was sort of this, sort of what I was studying in the lab in the wider context. Not only drugs, but access to drugs, the societal impacts of everything to do with global health. So that's where I sort of jumped off the academia track to start to look at sort of the broader picture. So which probably shifts me slightly towards being a little bit more of a generalist than a specialist. So I started to engage a little bit more in sort of the wider discussions around global health, particularly as it relates to policy, and writing about things, wide-ranging things from the link between poverty and disease, the link between health and access to medicines, so a whole range of things that weren't really about sort of biochemical pathway maps. So once you leave academia, there's not really a path set for you outside academia. They sort of leave you to wander the wilderness a little bit. And what I found was, where I ended up in was a little NGO at UNESCO, which works on primarily social sciences. And what I realized was that outside of sort of, not only sort of the health space, but there are other different tribes of science, all really sort of, not sort of competing, but finding ways to engage and interact with each other. So I worked on an early career capacity building program, which was really about getting natural scientists and social scientists at really this early career stage, sort of postdoctoral level, to really engage with each other, to really start to build projects together. Because you really find that there are different, despite what we say about one science, there are really different languages within all the sciences. And it turns out the secret to getting natural scientists and social scientists to work together isn't that hard. It's just a German chateau on Lake Como. It's a nice wine and some nice weather, so that was quite easy. And so perhaps I'll skip forward to where I am now in terms of going back to the title of the presentation, which is Health in Other Spaces. So at the moment, I work at the International Council for Science, and we work broadly on the Sustainable Development Goals and how we get science and the scientific community to play a part in all these Sustainable Development Goals. So if we look at the goals, the whole point of the goals are to say that yes, we do have a goal on health, we do have targets on health, but for me, all these things are sort of interrelated, and health isn't really about a siloed approach to looking at things. So there's not just health and whatever is the rest. Health is really about everything else that we see around us. Health is the impacts and the effects of health no longer sort of lie within the health sector. So health is really important for everything from climate change. There are concepts on planetary health, so not just climate change, biodiversity, nutrition, soil, all these things impact health. And what we need to move from, or at least in my mind, what I've sort of moved from through this narrative is looking at health not just from a single point of view, but from a more integrated point of view. So more specifically, I work on urban health. And within urban health, there are these, within the community, there are these large UN processes. So like where there was the SDGs, there was large international processes on urbanization. So last year we put together sort of a broad coalition of people to really raise the agenda of urban health within the whole sort of UN process of people talking about urbanization. So urbanization is not just about how we're going to build the cities of the future, how we're going to build the infrastructure that we need for the growing population. It's also about what is the cities of the future, how can we build them in a way that is sort of equitable and sort of healthy. So what we largely did was trying to mainstream health within all these narratives, within all these discussions. And when you work on sort of these large UN processes, what they do is countries come together, for example, like the Paris Climate Agreement, countries come together to sign a final document and to say, yes, we're going to meet these targets by so-and-so date. So it was the same with urbanization. In Quito in last year, so all the UN countries came together to sign a document that says we're going to take a more considered approach to urbanization and to sustainable urban development. So we managed to, throughout this whole process, get health much more embedded within that document. And so we worked with a lot of people. One highlight, we worked with the World Health Organization. So it's good to have, as you saw with the SDG sort of plaquettes, you have those 17 goals. And it's good to know that within those 17 goals, there's one sort of point of focus that you can sort of direct your sort of advocacy towards. So with the WHO, that was sort of our first point of call. So if you talk about health, you also have to talk about the WHO, which makes sense. So I'm going to leave it there, and just to say that that is the best I could have. That is the best way I've sort of thought about my career up until this point, taking from the sort of very basic, at the beginning, look at sort of biochemical pathway maps of a big disease to look at the more complex health systems. And just to say, if you, as you become alumni and go off to start your own careers, if you come to a city and there is no alumni chapter, please do start one. It's a great idea. So, thank you.
For questions?
Yes.
you started off really very specialist.
Yes.
Like doing really kind of like, I mean, I did not understand the tiniest bit of that, one of those slides there.
Exactly.
Do you still use a similar skill set because you're looking at something again that's very, very complex, and you're trying to find details and how things are? Is there a similar kind of hedge-based thinking in those two processes?
There is, particularly because when you talk about all these sort of large, particularly UN processes and large, grand things, people always talk about, there's a sort of the same sort of quotes people will say, it's like health is good for this, health is good for this. But if you get down to really specifics, you'll be able to sort of give examples of why focusing on health can improve something else. So it's good to have that sort of, at the same time, deep focus, but know how to translate it to sort of a little bit wider audience for people who probably perhaps don't have a specific narrow background. So yeah, it's good to have those both, work at both those levels.
Did you consciously choose to go more generalist, or was it a bit of an accident?
I did consciously choose. After sort of doing my postdoc, I felt it was too narrow, and I couldn't find a way how to immediately have it become very more general. But I still wanted to keep that sort of link between, obviously, the path I'd taken up to that point and something a little bit more general. Perhaps if I had jumped earlier to do, so say, a master's in public health, that would have been probably enough for me to get a little bit more wider. But yeah, that's the way it goes, I suppose.
Where's next?
Good question, yeah. I have no idea. Take it one day at a time, I think.
I missed the beginning. Where did you say you're currently based?
In Paris, at the International Council for Science.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're much more general about looking at all sciences, because we're a membership-based organization. A lot of our membership are sort of science academies, global science academies. So our membership is quite broad, and they've traditionally focused on sort of the geosciences and physical sciences. But now, as we see this push, particularly around sustainability, that has to sort of push up against more of the health sciences.
And does the institution do research itself, or is
No,
it more networking?
Yeah.
And so, is your role to be the kind of health expert in that area, and then or do you have to know everything about housing and environment and climate change and everything else?
It's sort of a role I've sort of stubbornly created for myself, I think. Because most people don't really have they sort of went to sort of Sciences Po, have a sort of political science background, so they have much more of that sort of generalist background. Because my background is quite specific, I try and maintain that sort of, keep that focused. So, and sometimes sort of in meetings, people probably roll their eyes when I keep talking about health, but for me it helps sort of move the conversation along. And it's not just, obviously, I mean, it's useful because, as we see with all these concepts like One Health, planetary health, climate change in health, there is this overlap and realization that health is actually a good tool and a good way to talk about things, to get things to change, to influence things. So as from the policy side, using health is a very good sort of motivator for, let's say, governments or policymakers to get things done.
What's the application process like? A lot of the questions that I tend to get asked from students, particularly about that kind of organisations that you work for, it seems to be quite opaque, seems to be there's not much information about.
It is, I mean, this sort of community I sort of had no idea existed before actually trying to look for something that was a little bit more wider. And you find there's actually a lot of sort of international organizations, NGOs, that sort of operate at this level and are not very well communicated about it. They do a lot of sort of good work, and they're sort of in the back corridors of high UN buildings and stuff like that, but they don't really, it's hard to find out exactly how to get in, how to get your foot in the door. So where I started, I did an internship for an NGO at UNESCO, and I think that's the only, because I read after leaving academia, a lot of people usually just have to sort of start again, and doing an internship is probably a good way to get your foot in the door.
So would that be a thing you'd recommend for other students to do, is to do an internship like that?
Unfortunately, yeah.
Okay.
I wouldn't recommend it, but yes,
Was it
unfortunately.
paid or was it unpaid?
It's always
Yeah.
unpaid, that's the trouble, yeah. And that's, I mean, that shifts the bias as well as soon as, luckily I was in France, so the social net is quite nice.
Are there paid ways of doing it?
Probably, particularly in sort of in Europe, you always have to sort of retrain and sort of do another sort of master's or another short course within that field, and to try and, because I think particularly when you do a course, you go to a university to do a master's, there is that sort of conveyor belt that shoots you into that sort of career path, and you don't really know that if you're on the outside. So probably the best way to, another way would be to sort of start again, go through the university track, but it depends.
Yeah, it seems quite difficult to kind of
to
break
navigate.
through.
Yeah.
So the current position you have now, did you get that after the internship, or did you have?
So I did the internship, and it was just, I mean, I think this is a similar story to the way it goes. You do an internship, and by the time you're about to leave, all of a sudden they have a position open, so you stay on because you've been there, everyone likes you, so you haven't stepped on any toes so far, so you managed to stay on. But then after that internship at UNESCO, I moved to the International Council of Science, mainly because, particularly coming from a research background, when people look at your CV, they think you can only really do sort of biochemical assays and things like that. So it's hard to sort of, perhaps all I needed was probably more training in rewriting my CV for more sort of general audience, but they don't really tell you what sort of skills you have, even though you think you have all the skills that you need. But I think perhaps, and also sort of HR, I think it's a two-way barrier. There's a barrier from your side, but also the organization and the HR person, they're the first person you have to sort of overcome. And if they look at your CV and they can't see the immediate fit because you haven't done it before, then it's always going to be an uphill battle.
And when you applied for your current role, did you know anyone in this organisation before? Did you do any networking?
Yeah, because the previous organisation I was at UNESCO, we had that early career scientist program in Italy. We ran with them, so I was already familiar to them. So I think that's, again, unfortunately, it's always the networks that you have that provide the best opportunities.
Yeah, which is why an alumni group is probably
exactly,
a
that's a
good
good idea. Yeah.
How many people are in the Paris chapter?
On the list, there's about 30 or 40, but we have about sort of 6 or 7 that come every time.
Yeah. A cool group.
Yeah.
How was the process of setting that up?
Well, I sent an email to the alumni office asking if there was a Paris chapter group. They said no, but you could start one. And I was like, okay, how do I do that? And they just said, just get a Gmail address, that will do. And then I started it, yeah.
Okay.
But I think they did most of the work, particularly knowing who the alumni are that are in Paris and sending out the first email. And then I just organized the first meeting.
Yeah, so potentially for anyone listening, if they want to do it, then
it's that easy. Yeah. It's that easy. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
It's really interesting.
Thank you.
I'm really genuinely surprised at how specialist you used to be and how genuine you are.
Yeah. That slide is quite. Which one? That one.
Yeah.
That's why I put it there. It's quite. That was my life for 3 years. Yeah.
Did you miss that at all?
Sometimes, but not in that detail. When I read things like, oh, there's a new vaccine or there's a new drug against something, I was like, oh, what does it actually hit? But that's the level I.
Because quite often students are trying to do the opposite to that. They're kind of like doing a master's in public health and they don't really know what they want to do with their lives, and they kind of try and work out, well, how can I narrow myself down a bit more to make myself more specialist.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to hear from someone who did that and then went back the way again. Yeah. It's nice to know that that's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we've had previous speakers who said it's really, really difficult to have a career as a generalist.
Yeah.
Would you say that's true from your perspective?
Well, for me, being a generalist, the hardest thing is trying not to specialize, I think. You have to sort of stay sort of very, very general. I mean, and that sort of frustrates me a little bit. But perhaps for other people that's fine. But I have no idea. Because even where I work now, it's the frustrating part is just that I don't get enough time to sort of drill down into the detail and to really pick out some good things that we can use to move forward.
Yeah, because you look like a detailed person.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you very much.
No problem. Excellent.